BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin.
Alright, hello everybody. Today is Friday, another Anything Goes Friday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? First, just a couple of quick announcements and reminders. The first is that, of course, every Monday is Zodiac Monday here on BBOR, talking about the Zodiac Killer. And Wednesday has most recently been devoted to the New Orleans Axeman, an unsolved serial killer mystery from the earlier part of the 20th century in the state of Louisiana. And while I was reading up on that case, I encountered the book Ready to Hang by Robert Talon, which talks about several different crimes that occurred in Louisiana, and I began that series discussing his segment on the Axeman because the general public's understanding of the Axeman case mostly originated from this book put out in the 1950s by Robert Talon. The final chapter is called The Axeman Wore Wings, and it discusses that case, and I invite you to tune into the Wednesday episodes. You can always like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. But I also wanted to go through some of the other stories in this book, and I did one on the Basin Street murder, which is featured here on this channel. It's called The Basin Street Murder, Louisiana's Darkest Secret, and this one is perhaps the reason why the book gets its namesake, Ready to Hang. Today we are going back to 1889 to discuss the bizarre death of Juliette Deitsch, and I say bizarre because she did pass away at the hands of her own doctor, but is it a murder? I mean, was it a murder? Was it an accidental death? And I want to be very clear. This book presented by Robert Talon is almost like an oral history, and I will be discussing his version of the events. And one of the ways in which he gathered information for this book was talking to people in New Orleans at taverns and bars and gaining as previously stated, a general public's understanding of the events, and details can be altered, shifted, and modified. But because Robert Talon also had connections to the newspaper industry, he did go back through newspaper sources and clippings from the 1800s, so it isn't purely based on stories that he heard, but also investigations and research, and everything is all put together into one. But Juliette Deitsch passed away. She was a very young girl, just after her 12th birthday, but also the person who is responsible for her death really overshadows her story. And his name is Etienne Deschamps. His name was, I should say. And he used multiple aliases in his life. One of them was Eugene Etienne. He was originally from France, and even though he spent time in North America as well as Brazil, he claimed that he only spoke and understood the French language. So, of course, in America, the only place to settle would have been in Louisiana, interacting in the French quarters. And he was a doctor, but a very particular type of doctor, one that claimed to specialize in magnetic physiology. And that isn't simply being very good with magnets, also claiming that he could manipulate certain types of energy and use them for healing cures and such. When I was reading this book, I was thinking that's exactly what the amazing James Randi would call woo-woo. But that's not really the focus of it. What I think was rather surprising was that Eugene Etienne, also known as Etienne Deschamps, developed this type of persona that he would use to charm his patients. They said that he was very, very good with the female patients. He came across as just this attractive, well-spoken doctor, and even with the male patients as well. He's not trying to charm them in somewhat of a romantic, seductive way, but rather just being very pleasant and easy to talk to. However, it took a really strange turn. It was not what I expected when I was reading that, all right, he's very good at talking to the patients, but he's not developing strong relationships with them. I thought it was going to be something to the effect of, oh, well, he was a womanizer. He's just saying these things so he can sleep around. Or maybe with the men, he's building a personality cult around him. He's talking about this pseudoscience, and he's getting lots of followers. Incorrect. I was incorrect. He is and was somebody who was trying to run a business, run his pseudoscientific medical practice, and that was it. He would see the patients for about an hour and do bizarre therapeutic measures, but ultimately, Robert Talon describes him as a very lonely man. And I think one of the reasons for that is heavily connected to the death of Juliette Deitsch, because she was a child at the time. I mean, she had passed her 12th birthday, but she was still a kid. And Etienne developed this very bizarre relationship with her because he would walk with her in the streets and even pass her off as his own daughter. But he began using a variant of chloroform therapy. I mean, getting away from magnets, right? And he's dousing a rag in chloroform and then knocking her out. And Juliette's sister would also watch the events that were taking place, because then Etienne Deschamps would take off his clothes and get into bed with Juliette, and they would be in bed naked together while she is passed out. And I mean, I think you can see where this is going, and I don't even want to say any more than that. But one thing that was so odd about this is Juliette's father, who is referred to as Father Deitsch in the book, gave Dr. Etienne Deschamps permission to conduct the therapeutic sessions, and it's kind of presented as he didn't really know what was going on. He knew that the chloroform was involved, and his sister, I mean, his daughter, Juliette's sister, was watching these events take place with nudity, and it just seemed so natural and calm and non-threatening that she didn't even think anything of it, even though she's the younger sister, so she would have been younger than 12 years old at the time. But I think for all intents and purposes, and I think it's just beyond reasonable doubt that Dr. Etienne was abusing Juliette. But one time, she didn't wake up. He's knocking her out with chloroform, and she didn't recuperate. She didn't wake up. And then he starts screaming, and he's telling Juliette's sister that she's not waking up, and then he says a very odd sentence: I'm going to die. Not that she is going to die, but he said very clearly that he was going to die. He said, I'm going to die. So that just adds to the perplexing nature of the mystery, and it will come up in the trial that was going to take place, because the authorities were left with this issue. Is this murder? Like, was this a murder case? Was this an accidental death? And what on earth to do with these allegations of sexual abuse and misconduct? And Dr. Etienne didn't speak English, so how would they conduct the trial exactly, and how would he get in a fair and honest trial? Not to mention that his whole practice revolved around pseudoscience involving energies and chloroform and weird stuff. And yes, Juliette passed away, and firstly, rest in peace to her. No matter what, she didn't deserve to die like that. But what is the heart and soul of the defense that was put forward by Dr. Etienne Deschamps and his lawyer was that her father had given him permission to use the chloroform as part of a therapeutic well-being, not exactly ritual, but therapeutic exercise that he did with her, and therefore it wouldn't be murder because there was no intent, there was no premeditation. He was not intending to cause her harm, and he had permission to conduct that type of activity, and it was simply an accident. And when I said he was talking to his lawyer, Dr. Etienne Deschamps did not speak English, so his lawyer did not speak French. So there was an interpreter, and it was, I believe, a member of law enforcement from reading Robert Talon's book. But no matter what, he's doing this through an interpreter, so he's just saying that his words are getting lost in translation, and they're being misrepresented. And how can he get a fair trial if he can't properly communicate his message and his side of the story without some type of interference? And this is just going to be the way that Dr. Etienne is manipulating the scene. Now, I can give you my honest take on the subject. He knew that he had done something wrong, but he didn't want to admit to it. He knew that he had been misbehaving with Juliette, and he didn't think that she was going to die. He didn't think that she was going to pass out and not wake up, but he didn't want to admit the wrongdoing. It's almost like a child who breaks something and just telling the story over and over again. No, I didn't break it. No, I didn't break it. Okay, child, I'm going to give you one more time, one more chance to confess. Did you break that thing? No, I didn't. No, I didn't. It's just an immature, childish response. And that's really how I'm noticing that behavior of his is really going to escalate once he is in prison, because he even begins misbehaving around reporters when they want to talk to him about the trial. He would just turn his buttocks to them and stand in the corner and then bend over, so he would be doing what Robert Talon describes as an insulting pose to them. And these types of behaviors happen over and over again, and he says that he's being discriminated against because he's from France and they're trying to insult the nation of France, making up excuses. And he also tries to talk about how his therapeutic methods were used in Germany before they were even used in France or North America. Therefore, these are common practices. But I thought that was a very odd insertion. And I know that this is Robert Talon recreating the story, but he threw in this story about just how these practices were developed and cultivated in Germany. And this is a really weird interjection, but I was reminded of the TV show Monk. Did you ever see that with Tony Shalhoub? And they actually wrote a series of novels that go along with the show, and one of them was Mr. Monk Goes to Hawaii. It's the only novel from that show that I followed. But yes, Tony Shalhoub plays this OCD detective, and in the novel, they have a discussion on con men, and the character Adrian Monk is talking about con men use their intelligence in a very odd way. They read up on a lot of things like fashion and design and background stories. So when they're trying to fool people, even some people who are like fake psychics, they can just look at someone's appearance. Oh, I'm sensing somebody in your family left you some type of heirloom from the 1960s, because they would be familiar with fashion and design, and someone has like some type of pin or design in their home, or some type of clothing, they would be familiar with what that was. And that was what I thought of when he's trying to talk about how his methods are popular around the world, and just some type of excuse or backstory about how he's abusing a child. But one thing that Dr. Etienne Deschamps did provide it that was evidence in favor of the defense were letters that were allegedly written by Juliette, talking about how she was in love with him, and she also talked about having an affair with another man in the community, and the man was working in a jewelry store, and they tracked him down, and almost certainly he did not have a real affair with Juliette. He did not have any type of genuine interaction with her. They vetted him, they checked out the story, and it appeared to be false. Well, then what does that mean for the defense? And the way that it's presented in Ready to Hang is that Dr. Etienne Deschamps had fabricated the letters himself to try and make the situation look normal. That's how it ties into the whole thing that I was talking about. When it seems like he was guilty, he knew that he was guilty, he knew that he had done something wrong, and he knew that he had caused her death irresponsibly, but he just didn't want to admit it. He wanted to keep throwing tantrums long enough to either avoid punishment or just to get the whole thing to stop, just to get the humiliation and embarrassment over with, because I think that somebody who was as narcissistic and demented as he was perhaps thought that he could talk his way out of it, or even if he knew that it was over, he wasn't going to go down without a fight, refusing to confess or admit wrongdoing. And it's really just saddening, because he took advantage of a child. He took advantage of countless people, including Juliette's father. And you might be thinking, well, he should have known better. I would agree with that. He should have had better judgment. But even though it's more than 100 years ago, however, he was deceived all the same. So then the trial goes on, and ultimately, Dr. Etienne Deschamps was found guilty. There were some interludes in there and some other events that took place, but he was found guilty. He very reluctantly went to the gallows. That's why the book is called Ready to Hang, or at the very least, that's one of the stories that involves this type of morbidity as well as dealing with the gallows. And there was a little bit of that discussion in the episode that you can hear on the Basin Street murder, which I invite you to listen to. And another great way to support this show is by going over to BuyMeACoffee.com. There's a link to that in the description box. That allows you to make a donation or a contribution to help support this program, and any donations will be used to go right back into the show to purchase true crime books like this one to talk to you guys about. And anybody who makes a contribution will get a shout out on Zodiac Mondays. So the final point is just that he goes to the gallows and he is ultimately executed. His final word was adieu, and he did not make any type of confession or allusion to the death of Juliette. And as I said, maybe it's fair to say that he was found guilty of her murder, but even in Ready to Hang by Robert Helaine, it talks about how maybe manslaughter would be an appropriate charge, and that would be something that he should be found guilty of. However, the way the legal system works in America, and I'm not a lawyer, my own unprofessional opinion is that when they say that murder has to involve intent, well, what's the intent? Was the intent to apply chloroform to her for his own sexual gratification or not? Was the intent to do this act deliberately or was it not? The way that manslaughter could work as an accident would be something to the effect of he threw a bottle of chloroform at the wall and the bottle broke and then the fumes came out and some way somehow knocked her unconscious. I know that's a ridiculous scenario, but that would be the whole point about how he's not directly administering the chloroform. Now, we've encountered this in true crime cases before, where they always try to make the case, well, what was the person actually intending to do? Otherwise, they could say, well, somebody shot somebody, and then they were like, well, I wasn't intending to kill them. I was just intending to shoot them, to send a message to them. Yeah, I wasn't trying to cause their death. With somebody like Dr. Etienne Deschamps, I think that it's very much to the former that he should have been found guilty of murder because he directly administered the chloroform. He just did it in a very negligent and inappropriate way. And this is a little bit modified. It has been modified in our legal system throughout the 20th century and into the 21st century, because now they have things such as criminally negligent homicide. They also have things that deal with medical malpractice, and the culpable homicide would be another one. So there are ways that the legal system can respond to something like this. And I think that if this had taken place in 2021, he would have been slaughtered in the court of public opinion, or he would have been found guilty of criminally negligent homicide, because I think that the lawyers would have been a little bit more apt, and also, there are new ways in which they can deal with translation in the courtroom now. So that whole defense of how I'm being misrepresented because he had to use an interpreter. The interpreter was probably sufficient enough. That's kind of a crackpot reason. But you might be still wondering about one thing involving the defense of Dr. Etienne Deschamps. And that is about when Juliette died. Why did he say that she's not going to wake up. I'm going to die. Now, this became something that Robert Talon talks about when, again, this is Dr. Etienne Deschamps trying to pass the blame onto Juliette, saying that she was genuinely trying to recreate a scene from Romeo and Juliet, and it was all her idea. And in Romeo and Juliet, not to give any spoilers, but there is a suicide pact that has gone wrong, and that someone is ingesting some type of potion that makes her appear dead for 42 hours, I think it was. It's always misquoted as 48 hours. I think is it 42 hours? And then someone else commits suicide, and that leads to another suicide. And that's what Juliette Deitsch and Dr. Etienne Deschamps were doing. They were involved with a suicide pact recreating Romeo and Juliet, and that he was meant to pass away, but he just either wasn't able or chickened out, couldn't go through with it, but it was all her idea and he was manipulated by this preteen girl. I think that is nonsense, hogwash, baloney, untrue, and if anything, that's probably just some type of pervert who took things too far with one of his innocent victims, manipulated a child, and he just was probably saying things very, very, very inappropriately and incoherently, and maybe he contemplated suicide after she had been administered the chloroform, or maybe even to the effect that he thought that he was going to be hanged for it, which ultimately he was, even though there were a series of events that took place. And another interesting side note, it's interesting, but it's also very tragic. Dr. Etienne Deschamps attempted suicide multiple times in prison, just unsuccessfully. And I mean, even to things like where he would just jump off the bed and try to hit his head on the floor, unsuccessful attempts. And he tried to do a variant of the hanging himself by tying a belt around his neck and then kneeling, and that can be a successful form of suicide. That's how Lyle Stevick passed away, another true crime mystery that was solved recently. Who was Lyle Stevick? I invite you to go through some other YouTubers' content on that, particularly from the Lord Nart's channel. But I think this just goes to show you, with the story of Etienne Deschamps and Juliette Deitsch, that people do some nasty things. People are very manipulative, and selfishness, manipulation, narcissism, unfairness, mistreatment, misconduct, it knows no bounds, no boundaries at all. That people are going to do very sick and nasty things, and they're also going to show absolutely no remorse for it. Instead, they're just going to blame somebody else or something else. And in this case, Dr. Etienne Deschamps blamed the victim. And absolutely terrible. And even though I'm not a supporter of the death penalty now, maybe this guy deserved it back in the 1800s. Well, that's all for me now. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. And I want to restate something. This is a story at Robert Talon's book, and it's his recreation and retelling of the story, and I'm responding to the events as they were presented there. And again, there are going to be details from the true narrative that took place back in the 1800s that might have been altered a little bit, but I also think that a very sad ending note is that Dr. Etienne Deschamps was a very ridiculous personality, and maybe some people were trying to use his ridiculousness as a form of entertainment. And I'm going to confess to you, I said from the very beginning that his wild antics and just his entire persona overshadows the fact that Juliette Deitsch lost her life because of either murder or negligence at the hands of this wacky magnetic chloroform doctor. So the concluding note is just that, yes, he might be outrageous, but that has to go on the back burner. It has to go secondhand, because we have to remember that he was just a nasty, cruel, manipulative, and pathetic individual who couldn't even stand up to the truth and admit that he had done something wrong. Okay, well, that's all for me now. Please put your ideas and responses in the comment section down below. Do you agree or disagree with any of the assessment things I said about how I thought that he was trying to constantly get out of this, that he's trying to constantly find ways just to sneak around this? He's just refusing to admit that he had done something wrong, that he was completely guilty, he knew what he was doing, he was a pervert, he was an abuser, and that he just was looking for some type of escape. What do you think about my assessment of this particular story? And one more time, the book is called Ready to Hang, 7 Famous New Orleans Murders by Robert Alon. I invite you to check out this series on the New Orleans Axeman, as well as the episode on the Basin Street murder, and please feel free to leave some comments below. One more time, you can like, subscribe, visit BuyMeACoffee.com. There's a link in the description box. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there is always BlackBoxNet88 over on Instagram. And I will see you over there for the bonus podcast. Until next time.